Good afternoon. This is John Horowitz, President and CEO of Easterseals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Thank you for joining us today. Our vision is to create a hopeful, inclusive community where all individuals realize their potential and live meaningful lives. We're honored to live our vision by presenting the Candid Conversations webinar series. You can access our past sessions, including how to talk to our children about racism, balancing self-care, career, and childcare in the pandemic, and the impact of the ADA and the work still to be done on our YouTube channel. Today's Candid Conversation brings together an expert panel to share more about the impact of early intervention for children with disabilities, developmental delays, and special needs. It is the proven path to hope, inclusion, and a meaningful life. I hope today's webinar will inspire you to take action, ensuring all young children in your life are screened and recognizing the societal and business imperative to support funding for and access to early intervention and high-quality child development. Now, I invite you to join the conversation by participating in our poll. If you'd like to get more involved in our services, please email info@eastfield.org. Also, please use the Q&A function to ask questions at any time. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce our panel. Jill Chimka is the head of Early Intervention Services for Easterseals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Jill holds a Master of Education degree in Communication Disorders from the University of Virginia and a certificate in early intervention from Georgetown University. She's a licensed and certified speech-language pathologist and has been a part of Easterseals' team for 18 years. Ellyn Dunford is a child and military family advocate and spouse of General Joseph Dunford, the 19th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Ellyn was a physical therapist specializing in trauma, acute care, and pediatrics for over 30 years. Ellyn is also a dedicated volunteer. We're honored to have her as a member of the Easterseals DC, Maryland, Virginia Honorary Board. She also serves the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, leadership education seminars, USO, and various spouse clubs and family readiness programs. She considers it a privilege to have watched family readiness programs morph from non-existence to spouse and volunteer-led to professionalized with extensive training and management. Toby Long is Professor of Pediatrics at Georgetown University, Director of Professional Development at the Center for Child and Human Development, and the Director of the Georgetown University Certificate in Early Intervention Program. She received her physical therapy degree from Boston University, master's degree in early childhood special education from George Washington University, and a doctoral degree in human development from the University of Maryland. She collaborates on serving infants and toddlers with disabilities and delays using contemporary evidence-based practices throughout Eastern Europe, Central Asia, the Gulf region, and Asia. She's on the editorial boards of the Journal of Early Intervention, Physical and Occupational Therapy in Pediatrics, and Infants and Young Children, and has authored over 60 peer-reviewed publications. She's received many awards, including the Lucy Blair Service Award, the Jean Fisher Distinguished Mentorship Award, the Bud DeHaven Award, and was named a Catherine Worthington Fellow. Easterseals is proud of our partnership with Georgetown that includes serving as a practicum site for Georgetown graduate students and ongoing training partnerships. Dr. Abila Tazanu is the founder and executive director of the One World Center for Autism. She's a board-certified general pediatrician who previously worked as a clinical associate at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C., providing school-based healthcare for children with special needs. Dr. Tazanu received her BS in microbiology and her doctorate of medicine from Howard University. She completed her pediatric residency at Inova Fairfax Hospital. A native of Washington, D.C., raised by parents who immigrated from the West Africa and the Caribbean, she resides in Laurel, Maryland with her husband and 5 children, 3 of whom have autism. Finally, I'm pleased to turn the panel over to our moderator, Darnell Burton, Vice President of Development at Easterseals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. As a dad of 3, Darnell also has a keen interest in today's topic. Darnell?
John, thank you. Can everyone hear me clearly?
We gotcha.
So I'm always a little embarrassed because my credentials don't read as long, but I get to talk first, so that makes me feel like I'm almost as important as the people, right? So first and foremost, thank you everyone who's logging in. We really appreciate you guys being here today. I am the father of 3, and you know, one of the things that I wrote when I posted this on LinkedIn is I said, you know, as a father of now teenagers mainly, I said this wasn't something that we talked about a lot until it was almost pressing. It was right up there at the 9th month. I'm really impressed that, you know, the conversations that are happening now, the early screenings that are available for people, and the opportunity to dialogue with people that are in the same community. What I thought we'd do today, just to set the stage, first of all, if you haven't invited your friends, send this out to everybody with children and those that have friends with children. We'd love for more folks to join us. Secondly, this is being recorded, so we're going to share it on our YouTube channel afterwards, as all of our other videos prior to this and webinars have been done. And thirdly, let's have fun today. Ask questions, feel free to chime in, engage. This is not meant to be a stagnant kind of conversation. But what we're going to do is run like this. The first 2 to 3 minutes, we're going to allow each of the panelists to talk about themselves, talk about the lane they're going to play on this webinar / call. And then after that, I'm going to pose a question to the group as a whole. And then once we do that, you can ask the questions, you can chime in. Our hope is that we have some folks on the back end that will be answering questions, as well as our panelists. Feel free to answer some of the questions that are going to come in. So without further ado, Jill, you're our resident Easterseals superstar. Thank you for being on here today. Would like to start with you. First things first, introduce yourself. Talk a little bit about what Make the First 5 Count is from your perspective, okay, and give us a little bit about it.
Great. So thank you so much, Darnell and John. Very excited to be here today. The first 5 years of life are near and dear to my heart, so I'm really excited to have all these panelists here to share their knowledge and experience. My background is as a speech pathologist. Right now I'm the Director of Early Intervention Services at the DC Center. I also help support all of our child development centers in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. We provide services in a center. We also do home-based services, and we've been getting lots of experience lately providing services via telehealth, thanks to COVID. So, which has been a great opportunity to really focus on coaching parents, which is really what early intervention is all about. So very excited about that. The Make the First 5 Count campaign, I think, has probably been around for about 8 years. We at Easterseals really know that the first 5 years of life are so important. They lay the foundation for child's long-term well-being and overall success. We know that the majority of brain development is happening by age 5. We usually say 90%. I think by age 3, we've got 80% of brain development happening. So that birth to 3 is really an important area to get in. We also know that children learn and grow at different rates, and even the most attentive parents can miss some of the important milestones. So we, as a leading provider of inclusive child development services at Easterseals, we really wanted to partner with parents, and we were trying to think of what's a way that we can really reach all parents of children. And the big initiative was the Make the First 5 Count campaign that came out. Part of the campaign is really just building awareness of how important the first 5 years of life is. The other portion of it is, how do you know if your child is on track? So really the goal is to assure that children are reaching developmental milestones and also identify potential delays as soon as possible. So a big part of the campaign is offering a free, comprehensive, and confidential online screening tool called the Ages and Stages Questionnaire. It's in its 3rd edition, so you hear it called the ASQ3. And a little bit later in the webinar, I'm gonna go through that. But that kind of in a nutshell is what our Make the First 5 Count campaign is all about.
Hey, Jill, thank you for mentioning that. On the back end, can we put is there a link for that questionnaire that you speak about? I know we're going to do it at the end, but if we can post it now for folks to see, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think makethefirst5count.org. Or if you Google Make the First 5 Count, that's what's going to pop up for you.
All right, fantastic. Mm-hmm. Dr. Tazanu, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your fantastic skill set, history, credentials. Quick question for you again. We'd love for you to talk about your background, but please tell us about, the One World Center for Autism and why you founded it.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. The One World Center really came out of the heart of parents, myself and other parents who really basically were looking for connections when we first got the diagnosis of autism in our children. We are based in Prince George's County, Maryland. At the time, my first child to be diagnosed, who's now going to be turning 21, even as a pediatrician, I was not sure where to go, who to turn to. And so in the process of reaching out to her classmates, parents, and other professionals within the school system, it really became very evident that we needed to have a hub, a place that we could be able to access resources. So it really started in the hearts of parents. We received a small grant from the American Academy of Pediatrics to do some needs assessment. Forms of services would include family support and then most outreach. And so that was started off with family support services and to do all of those under healthcare we provide, as well as recently added. So comprehensive center that there are questions about development that answered next steps because there's so and we know that
Dr. Tazanu? Hello? Dr. Tazanu? I think we're losing you a little bit. Is it everyone else kind of seeing a little bit of a delay? All right.
Oh, sorry there. I'm
No,
not.
It's
Can you hear me better?
We can. I was letting you know that. So we heard pieces of that. Gonna come back to you just as we adjust that. Look, the most popular person on this panel, she told me to introduce her as the super fantastic Miss Toby Long. Toby, thank you so much for joining us. I got you. You didn't think I was gonna do that, right? Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Darnell. However, I never said that.
I made
Just to get things on the record straight. Well, I first want to thank Easterseals for having me. I think this is a really great opportunity to talk about certainly an area of pediatrics that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm probably the oldest one on the panel, and I have really been able to see the evolution of early intervention right from the beginning. I was there well before early intervention was conceived as a policy in the United States and sort of mandated by law. So I have really been able to watch how the field has really grown and reshaped and really have focused in on bringing parents into the process. As Jill mentioned earlier, that our early intervention process, especially at Easterseals, is really a process of coaching families to help their children develop and grow into the best that they can be. So we're taking the focus out of the hands of the professional and helping professionals help families. And that is really, really key. And it's a very hard process for a lot of professionals to learn. So one of the things that we have done over at Georgetown over the last several years is really to help create programs that help professionals sort of reframe their thinking on their role in working with young children with developmental delays and disabilities. I think that Jill mentioned a couple of things that was really important to the field as it is now, and that is to help kids participate by learning through doing. And we all know we learn best by practicing and doing what we like to do with people we like to do things with. So especially Easterseals is a prime example of an early childhood sort of program that has kids of all abilities doing and participating and learning together. So we really promote that kind of a philosophy in early intervention. And I think that the last 30, 35 years has really evolved to create a system that is much more responsive to families, and certainly, hopefully, have a better experience for families than Abila experienced with her first child.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. And I don't know if you're the oldest. I'm the oldest on the call. You know, the grandma.
I know I am.
Well, when I walked into marriage, my beard was black, and now I'm the oldest on the call. Ellyn, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you today. I think you offer a unique perspective, being a military parent and a spouse. So again, would love to hear your background, but let me position this question. What are the biggest challenges for military families regarding early diagnosis screenings, specifically for developmental disabilities and services for children?
So during our time in the military, we just retired, and I'm in my 20th house since I got married. So that gives you, we served a lot longer than most families do, but it gives you an idea of the challenge. Imagine bringing your special needs child to 20 different houses. So for military families, there's a lot less consistency in their medical providers or their educators than for civilian families. For example, my third child, my daughter, who's now 29, she moved at the age of 1, 2, 4, 5, and on and on. And she changed pediatricians every time. And then when she started school, every time we moved, she changed not just a teacher as she changed grades, she changed the whole school system. So every time you start with a new provider, they have no idea what your child's resting level of skills or their personality is when they show up. So they have nothing to compare to in previous times. And that's the case for any child who moves frequently, whether they are military or whether they are with a family that's transient. They also change schools more frequently than their civilian counterparts. So even if the family has an IEP for the child, that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to, in the new school system, get into exactly what they were getting for services in the previous school system, because classroom sizes will be different, availability of things depending on how large or small the communities will be different. And every time they change, their therapies, regardless of where they get them from, change. So they have a new therapist for all the different sorts of supportive services they have. And if you qualify in one school system, you may not qualify for those same services or even any services in another school system. Or there is often a wait to get onto special needs for our children under 3 who are not yet in the school system. There's often a wait to get into a state's particular services for under 3. And then there may even be a wait to get in to see a new pediatrician. I've heard stories where a child could not even get in to see a pediatrician for their initial well visit for 3 or 4 months, which is definitely a problem for a special needs child. For example, when we were in North Carolina, it was our first tour. I was the only pediatric physical therapist in the entire county with a base sticker and a military ID that would allow me to easily get on and off of military installations so that you could see a child in their home, which is really a challenge for anyone who has a child who's fragile or fatigues early, or if you bring a young baby to the physical therapy clinic and you drive a half an hour, by the time you get there, the kid's probably done in and not able to really give their best. So otherwise, children who lived on a military base may have to take their, go to get their services off the installation because it's very difficult to find someone who can easily get on the installation, particularly post 9/11.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. So, you know, I want to give our CEO, John Horowitz, a chance to chime in here. Being very frank, John is really adamant about us having this conversation for a number of reasons. One is, it's one of our mantras here at Easterseals. One of the things we talk about with our parent population, but also I think in this COVID environment, it is raising its head as something that needs to truly be talked about, not only because of us being separate, but you have the discrepancies of the race relations, socioeconomics, all those things that are really raising their ugly head and say, oh my gosh, we really need to talk about these things. So John, I want to offer you an opportunity to chime in here. And then again, if we have any folks that are teachers or other here, please send some questions to our panelists. We want you guys to engage. I want to be able to give them some harder topics than here. Darnell ask questions. But John, please go ahead.
So thank you. Expanding on what our panelists have shared already, and Darnell, what you just mentioned, a lot of the issues that Ellyn was talking about that military families have always faced in terms of having a hard time getting to the pediatrician, maybe not being able to get into a high quality child development right away, are now things that many, many families are facing in COVID. We know that even before the COVID crisis, about 1 million children every year entered kindergarten at risk of undiagnosed delays and disabilities because they weren't getting the proper screenings. And we also see that the referrals from early intervention are down dramatically now, which we hypothesize is because fewer people are getting screened and fewer kids are in high quality child development. So I was, as Darnell shared, passionate about having this session to really raise awareness of the importance of screening and the ability of parents to do it themselves. And I think, that was something that both Toby and Jill were talking about making, and Abila, enabling parents to be self-advocates for their children. And, that to me is a huge part of creating a hopeful, inclusive community, because when you can advocate for yourself, that's when you have hope. And so that's why I'm so passionate about today's topic and eager to hear more from our experts.
So I wanted to come back to Toby. Toby, our superstar guy, keep messing with you, talked about that, right? What really is early intervention? You talked about being in this game for a while. What is early intervention? I think that means different things to different folks. And then I want this to be more of a conversation amongst everyone. So I'm going to start with you, but Jill, I know this is your specialty, and everyone else, please chime in. What is early intervention?
That's a really, really great question, because especially over the last several years, there's been a lot of confusion when people talk about early intervention with either the capital EI or the small EI. So certainly intervening early with any kind of problem is early intervention. But when we talk about early intervention, we're talking about the system of services and supports that have been created through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which provides these services and supports to families of young children from birth to age 3 with a developmental delay or a disability, or in some states, a very high risk for becoming delayed or disabled. And it's really a system to help support families support their children. It was never imagined as being a service system that children receive occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech language pathology. However, many children do receive those services, and in many respects, people assume that's what early intervention is. But early intervention can be a multitude of services. It can be home visiting services. It can be counseling services for families. It can be, in some situations, healthcare for diagnostic purposes. It can be sort of social work supports, social service supports. It can be anything that helps the family provide the most optimal learning environment for their child, with the goal of avoiding more costly services especially when children reach school age, that have to access special education services and supports. We know those are very, very expensive. So the government, in its wisdom, 35 years ago, decided to provide services early on that may help prevent children from needing services when they enter the school system. And they're finding actually that kids who do receive the appropriate services by the appropriate people in the appropriate way do prevent needing some services as they enter school age, and they enter kindergarten at a more appropriate developmental level and ready for learning. So that's sort of it. So what's nice about early intervention, Ellyn mentioned the IEP. So in early intervention, we also have a plan, and it's called the Individualized Family Service Plan. So unlike in school age, we really do regard families as being a critical component of the care team or the services. So we take into consideration the priorities of the family to create the plan.
Toby, I appreciate that. Everybody else, any thoughts on this? Chime in, please. Jill?
Cool. Yes. So yeah, piggybacking on what Toby said, we really, we work a lot with families. At Easterseals, we work a lot with our child care providers too, because we want to see kids where they are during the day. And back in the olden days when we could all be together, we had many children who were in childcare, 30, 40 hours a week. So they're spending a lot of time there. So we always really talk about who's the caregiver for the child. So we think about the parents and what are the routines at home, what are the routines at childcare. It's really, Toby talked before too about opportunities to practice skills. So, you think about when you're at childcare, you've got arrival and you've got meals and snack time and toileting and play and all kinds of opportunities to practice skills. So that's the big part of it. Also to the kids who are in early intervention, I think a lot of people recognize that there are children with disabilities who are maybe born with something like Down syndrome. Those kids often hopefully are going into early intervention, just to help support parents. We also have a lot of children who might have a developmental delay. Maybe they're not walking on time or they're a little late talking. We have a lot of children that come into early intervention. Their families get support for maybe 6 months or a year, and then the next time there's an evaluation or we talk to the parents, and the parents say, you know what, we don't really have any concerns anymore. Or like, the daily routines are going well for us. So we have some kids that Toby talked about before, they come in early intervention and they leave before they're even 3 years old, or definitely before they get to school. So it's such a valuable service. And I think, kind of spreading the word about what is really early intervention, because I think people maybe have a lot of preconceived notions about what it is and what it isn't. So glad we're having this talk.
I'm gonna come back to you, Jill, but Abila, I want you to jump in here, and then Ms. Dunford, and then Jill, I'm gonna come back to you and ask you a specific question about the transition between early childhood, kids progress through the system. So, Tazanu?
Yeah, I hopefully you can hear me clear. But what I think the two things that I got away from what Toby shared was appropriate. I think that's a huge word when it comes to early intervention. I think it's important to recognize it is a spectrum of services, and it's a spectrum of services that can be provided by a variety of different professionals, and even people who are not necessarily professionals, even peers. So early intervention is as unique and as diverse as the child that is being serviced. I think those are the two big take-home messages. For me, I always stress the importance of the family, as we had talked about before, because in that early intervention space is where parents are coming to grips with the diagnosis usually. And so what is so beneficial is to have that family support. A lot of that tends to I would say the rug kind of grows smaller underneath your feet once you make that transition away from early intervention. There's a lot of things that early intervention does really well for certain populations. And there are some populations that are a little bit more challenged when it comes to early intervention services that actually need more robust services and may not be able to access it.
So I on you on purpose because I wanted you to go here, right? I want you to talk about specifically what you're talking about, because I think that there's this unique bifurcation. The military has a uniqueness. I think the African American community has a uniqueness as well. So I'd love for you to dive into that. And then Ms. Dunford, I'll come to you, Ellyn.
Yeah, so that's a big question, but I think there's so many factors that go into the quality of early intervention. I think if we start there, first, just starting with parental acceptance around a child's developmental differences. We know that culture plays a huge role in how people perceive developmental differences. And so I work primarily with a largely African American, international and Latino population. And so just acceptance of developmental differences is very much based on, cultural stigma sometimes. As I mentioned before, my background is Caribbean and West African. So in those cultures, even within those cultures, there are differences. In the Caribbean side, usually there's a dismissal of a developmental concern. Usually it's considered behavioral or something that you can correct with some level of discipline. On the West African side, a lot of times it's spiritualized or it's considered, something that should be hidden. And so really just having conversations, that some of the earliest intervention you can give is conversation around destigmatizing what developmental difference is, removing the shame that sometimes parents feel when it comes to a developmental difference. Once we get past that point, then also a lot of what early intervention should encompass is helping parents with the acceptance, helping them with the grief that they may be feeling, because all of those things are so critical for them to be open to the other professionals coming in and providing services for their children. And then when it comes to just quality, I do believe that sometimes there's a lot of differences. It depends on where we live and what providers are there. I can speak for the county that I reside in. I think for certain developmental differences that we do better. Autism specifically, I think is a lot more challenged. These are our children usually have higher needs, and that I feel just traditional early intervention can support. And so being able to educate parents about other offerings within the community that can help with changing the trajectory of their child's development is equally important as just the services that are rendered under traditional early intervention. So
I appreciate that. Thank you for taking a big topic and whittling it down in time frame. I think there's an opportunity for those who may have other questions to write you directly. If you guys have any questions specifically about that, please send a question or send a chat to Dr. Tazanu. Ellyn, this is the other side of that. The military has its own level of stigmata that comes with some of those challenges. Can you talk about that a little bit? Can you delve into that? I think, we always get a large military population that deals with Easterseals, whether it be parent population or the military itself. I'd love for you to kind of talk in similar tone to what Abila just talked about.
I think that a lot of how a military family deals with or interprets or understands the challenges and also the opportunities available to their child, it depends on a number of factors. So it depends on their pediatric care's awareness of what's available for services. Obviously, if you're a first-time parent, you are going to rely an awful lot on your pediatrician for the basic kind of resources that you would get as a parent. When you are a military family, you may, even during one duty station, change pediatricians if you have a military pediatrician who gets transferred. And you're relying on somebody in one region of the country to understand what's going on in that region. Then you move to another region and you have a whole new set of resources and opportunities in the community. The other thing is that parents have always relied quite a bit on their family for awareness of things to do with child rearing. But when you're in the military, chances are you are nowhere near your family members, not your siblings, not your parents. So to do that remotely, where someone can't actually handle and see your child, makes it that much more difficult for a family member to give input or to assist. And then the final thing is that most new parents or parents of young children rely heavily on the input of their friends and their neighbors in child rearing techniques beyond what they learned while they were growing up. So we're in a time where, you know, play groups are not happening for the most part. You have kids just out at a playground running around, or you go to Mommy and Me at your church or a community center. Most of those things have lapsed in a lot of communities, or at least were gone for a period of time. So you lose that observation that a parent would have of another child who's approximately the same age, who's speaking, eating, you know, performing various activities of daily living. You don't get that observation time that you would get just during the course of normal play, shopping in the mall and looking at somebody else who's, you know, in the little playground section of the mall. All of that is a bit of a problem. And when you are a military family and you move quite a bit, a new neighbor is going to be very hesitant to come over when you've only been there a month and say, you know, I really think there's something wrong with your child. Their movement pattern doesn't look quite right. You know, you're just not going to do that unless it's somebody that you know well. So there again, you sort of lose the opportunities that someone who's in a more stable, static environment would have. I think we should all err on the side of educating everybody humanly possible about the opportunities for evaluating their own child, for understanding how their extended family members or the medical community, they should all know as much as possible about the resources available, because when someone comes along that they're a little concerned about, if they don't know where to refer people to, they're not going to refer them.
Yeah.
And I think we have resources in every state, in every community. The challenge is who knows about those resources. One of the great things would be to make sure that Military One Source knows all about and shares the information about First 5, because that is the free, much touted resource for military families, and it covers people up until a year after they depart the service, to make sure that people will reach out and find it, because they just may not be in a situation where anybody else is going to point out what they're not seeing or what they're not acknowledging.
You know, you bring up you don't mind if I jump in here?
No, please do.
No, this is the part. Please jump in really quick. Just some house cleaning. We're at almost 2:40. We're almost 40 minutes into this. So thank you everybody for participating. I don't want you to lose your thoughts. So really quickly, right after you, we're going to share the panel results with the group, and then we're going to switch to you, Jill, so that you can share your piece.
Well, so actually, this is probably a good lead-in for Jill, but you mentioned something really, really important. You know, we as professionals think about development, think about disability. We have vast knowledge on how children do things, how they learn to do things, when they should do things, and when things should be going, when things go a little bit astray or different. Most people don't know that information. And if you're a young person, especially in the military, which most, you know, sort of the enlisted men and women are young, and you're having your first child, if your child isn't saying 3 words together by the time they're 18 months old, you wouldn't think anything of it. It's
Until somebody points it out.
Exactly. And so if somebody isn't pointing it out, or you don't pick up one of those checklists somewhere in the grocery store or at your pediatrician's office, you may not even think about it. It's just things that we generally don't as young people think about, especially if our kid is sweet and lovable and as wonderful as possible because they're our kid, right? You're not going to say, oh, golly, he's only saying 2 words. So I think having the screening available to everyone is an incredible benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a challenge. Every parent has had the experience where you bring your kid in when they're under the age of 1 or under the age of 2. And the appointment time is like not a good time of day for them. The kid is passed out from the drive in the car because it's their nap time, and by God, they're going to sleep. So it is not even always an opportunity for the physician who's seeing the child to watch their development. And I want to point out that one of the great resources we have, especially with telemedicine, that's being practiced so often, so that families don't have to risk bringing a child in except maybe to get their injections, their shots. You can always video your child playing and doing the things where you don't think it looks quite right. You can video your child talking. You can video them chewing and swallowing or gagging while they're supposed to be chewing and swallowing. And you can send that to your physician, share it with a physician, share it with the nurse practitioner, whoever sees you, and say, you know, my kid is 16 months old, and is this right? And so there are very few parents I know, young parents, who do not have a smartphone that can do that and that can share it. So I would encourage people sharing that that thought, especially if they go through this make first 5 count, and they start to see where are the areas where somehow I'm not on the scale here. Video it. Just video it, and then you have it to show the physician if your child does not demonstrate those same issues in the office.
Ellyn, you took one of my questions. Thank you very much. So
I
two
wanted
things.
to add,
What?
can I just add one quick
Go ahead.
thing?
Ask that question. Go ahead.
One quick thing. Just after listening to Ellyn and Toby, I think it's really important that we understand that early intervention isn't any one profession's responsibility or job. It really is a community-based, it has to be a community-based effort. So sometimes we're looking to the physician to be the one to identify and to get the ball rolling. But even amongst physicians, we are very much challenged. We have differences in training. And so that's why screens are so critical to level that playing field. So that's the one thing I really wanted to make clear, that everyone's responsible. It's the educational world, it's the physicians, it's the related service providers, and it's even just community members being open to understanding that we are all different, and that includes our different abilities. And so to be able to be open to recognizing and to help people get the services that they want.
And I think physicians should feel very comfortable referring a child that they just really aren't sure whether there's a problem or not. No speech and language pathologist, occupational therapist, nutritionist, whatever, is going to be upset because somebody sent them a referral on a child that turns out to be actually on target. Nobody's going to be upset with that.
And to encourage parents to trust their instinct, because a lot of times we may, so even as a physician, when I shared my personal story, my first child that got diagnosed, I loved her pediatrician dearly, but when I brought concerns about her development, I just had another baby. And so she told, I was comforted or reassured that those developmental differences was, because of this new baby in the house. But something in me kept saying, no, it's just, this is not right. And so after a year of just not feeling that her development was appropriate, I actually ended up getting the diagnosis through the EI route and then doubling back through the medical route. So there's many different paths that we can take to get early intervention services. That's why it's so important that we, as a community, we're all, educated and aware and can help.
And that, you bring up a really important part about the referral mechanism. It does not have to start in the medical community. The early intervention system has always been set up that anybody can call up and say, I want an evaluation, and the system will provide that. They don't need a referral from your pediatrician. Which is really, really very helpful. Lots of people don't understand that. They always think they have to go back to their physician.
Both parties have a lot that they can contribute to.
Yes.
Hey, I got to pause you guys, because if we go, first of all, this is a great conversation. I appreciate it. Thank you. Jill, you got to be on and get off because these
All
ladies
right.
are going to pick me up if
Okay,
we don't
I'm
get back
moving.
to the conversation. All
That's
right?
great. Everybody's just been building up and sharing such great information that really backs up what we're here to talk about today. So I think Toby mentioned that, you know, parents are not necessarily child development experts, but parents are experts in their own child. So what I love about the Ages and Stages questionnaire is it really puts parents in the driver's seat. So what we do know about doing the ASQ is that most parents are reliable and accurate reporters on their children. I think when they've done research about, there's like 93% agreement when a parent does it and when a professional does it. So that's really great. And then the concerns that parents have about their child, they're really highly predictive of how the child ends up doing on the ASQ. So we're going to take a look at the ASQ right now. Let's see. All right.
And then after we look at this really quickly, on the backside, Abby and Christine, if you could share after we go through this, the panel stuff, that would be super helpful as we start to wind down.
Great.
Thanks for everybody. Thanks for everybody that's
All right.
joined. We've had a high in the 50s, and we've been ebbing and flowing since. Go ahead, Jill.
Cool. Can everybody see my screen? Should be that the make the first 5 count. Great. There's actually a lot of great information on this website. I recommend that everybody goes and checks it out. Very good resources. I'm going to go ahead and just take us to the screening. Let's see. All right. So great. So here's the ASQ screening tool. It's the Ages and Stages questionnaire. I love this because it has a little prep sheet for parents. The thing that is unique about the Ages and Stages questionnaire is this questionnaire changes as children get older. So there are actually lots of questionnaires in this toolbox that just depend on your child's age. So if if a parent clicks on this, they'll see the kinds of things. They do need some materials for this. And usually as the kids get older, you need a little bit more materials. We're going to do a pretend child who's 24 months old. So I'm just going to scroll down. So here at 24 months old, it gives you some of the sample questions and then some of the materials that you may need. And most of these are things that you're going to have at home. So you can take a look at all this. Yes.
Jill, while you're going through this, how
Yes.
many parents in the Easterseals population have really used this, and what has been the results? Have folks found this effective? Have they been able to, one of the things I think of as a parent, me personally, and I think Abila talked about this is, and even Ellyn, some of the stigma that comes with it, like, man, how do I feel as a parent? Have I done the right things? Do I do this? Do parents feel like this is a safe place to go and take the test first? And then are they sharing information with?
Yeah, so I mean, the nice thing about this is that it's confidential. So if you are feeling uncomfortable in the beginning to really talk about it, you will fill this out, parents will fill it out and then share an email address, and then it will get scored and then just sent back to your email address with a copy of the screening tool. So you'll have that. The other great thing about this tool is that it can be used from children as young as 4 weeks up to, I think it's like 66 months, so 5.5 years old. So we've got it throughout, the age span. I also recommend just doing this with frequency. So usually birth to 24 months, you can screen every 4 to 6 months because your child is changing and developing and you're going to see new skills on here. As they get a little bit older, you can do it every 6 months, and then maybe when they're 3 or older, you can do it annually. You can always do it when you've got a concern about your child. I think sometimes it's just nice to know where your child is, even if you don't have a concern about their development. Sometimes you've got children who maybe the older sibling was super chatty, and you've got a child who's not quite as chatty, and you've only got that as comparison. So you can kind of take the tool and see where your child is ending up. And we've had parents do this and say, oh, my child's actually right on track. It also kind of gives you an idea of what you can be working on in the future. As we've talked about before, parenting actually in the age of COVID is very isolating, but if you don't have the other kids to look at, you don't really know where your child should be. So this is actually pretty helpful for that as well. So let's take a look. We're just gonna click on this, take the screening. The big important thing to remember is to always do the right screening for your child's age. So here's information about the screening. It is offered free, which is great. We've got corporate sponsorship of that from Comcast, NBC Universal, so we're very excited about that. What you're going to do, the first thing is put in your child's date of birth. I'm just going to make mine 2 years old, 24 months. It's going to ask you how many weeks premature your child was. If your child was not premature, you still have to put in 0, or it's going to ask you for it again. So we'll say 0. And then
keep going. That's a time check. We're 10 minutes out.
Okay, cool. So I will say I'm screening my child today. You can I usually recommend taking a look at the screening tool first and then taking some time to screen your child. What it's going to give you here is an option to look at a PDF of this, which is super helpful. If you've got a printer at home, you can print it up. If you don't, you can just take a look at it. When you're actually doing this, you're going to click on enter the results. I'm going to click on this so it shows you the PDF. So this is the 24-month questionnaire. You'll see up here, it does have an age span on it. So it's 23 months, 0 days to 25 months, 15 days. So we got about a 2.5 month span there. So as long as your child is in this age range, you're on the right one. If you're confused about how old your child is or figuring out months, there are age calculators. I think actually ASQ actually has an age calculator app. So if you're doing this at home, you don't have to fill this out quite yet because you're going to add that on the website. It starts off with the important points to remember. Try every activity with your child. Make it fun. Make sure your child is rested and fed. If you've got children, you know how important that is. This has a good note about toddlers here.
That's not just kids, that's for me
I
too.
know, people. If you know people, you know how they get. You don't want any hangry kids for this one. So as we know, toddlers may not be cooperative and do the things that you want them to do when you ask. So this basically says if this is something that you know your child can do and they're not doing it right now, you can still give them a yes. So it's going to be broken down into 5 different areas of development. Your options are yes. I usually think of this as like yes, mastered, something my child can do regularly. The next is sometimes, maybe it's like a new skill and you've only seen them do it once. And then the last is not yet. When you're filling it out, you're going to want to make sure you answer every question. You know, they're pretty straightforward here. They will have some details that are kind of nice to read. The communication section is going to have questions about expressive communication, which is the words that your child is using at this case, and also how your child understands language, their comprehension. So you'll see all these, you'll be filling all of these out. Gross motor skills are kind of your skills. At that age 2, we're really looking a lot at mobility. This is going up and down stairs, jumping, running, starting to kick. Fine motor, that's on this one, it's kind of the use of their hands for activities. And this is where you may have to, I find sometimes on fine motor, that's the one that sometimes kids need a little bit of practice with, because I think as kids get older, there's one about, can they cut with scissors? Well, if they've never had scissors, you know, they might not have the opportunity to do that. We've got problem solving. And then the last one is personal social skills. And I think an important thing to bring up too, Abila has talked about this too, are really cultural things. We've got one here, does your child eat with a fork? So if that's not a way that your family eats, you know, I don't want parents to stress about that. You know, but if it's important that your child eat with a fork and that's something they're not doing, it's something that you can practice doing. And then here we are, the last section here is kind of the overall concerns. This is a great opportunity for parents to share if they do have concerns about their child. You know, it talks about hearing, you know, vision, what does their language sound like, what's their movement like, any medical problems, which I think is very important too. Clearly, like if your child is having some hearing issues, you want to get that resolved. And then here, any questions about behavior? Does anything about your child worry you? So I'm going to pull up a finished one here. Do a new share.
Just time check, 2 more minutes.
Okay, all right, great. So this is what you will get back. So if you go on the Make the First 5 Count website, you're gonna fill out the entire questionnaire. You're gonna hit submit. Within 2 weeks, you should get back what we call the information summary, and then also a copy of the screening tool that you filled out. So you can print that up if you like, or you can share with your pediatrician, evaluators, whoever needs a copy of it. So I just did my example baby who's 2 years old. I'm actually going to scroll down a little bit here. And it's filled in with what the parents' concerns were. So for this child, let's see, so there's the copy of the questionnaire. So you're getting a whole copy of that. So the parents' concerns are listed at the bottom and also on this page as well too, which is the first page. So this parent had a lot of concerns around their child's language, which we see is very common in 2-year-olds. You know, do you think your child hears well? No, she's had a lot of ear infections. Do you think she's talking like other toddlers her age? Not yet. Sounds like walking is good. So very concerned with these ear infections. So there is a little key for where the skills fall. The white area is above cutoff. The light gray area is considered monitor. And then the dark gray area is below cutoff. That means that further assessment may be needed. I do want to emphasize that a screening tool is not a diagnosis. It's just telling you, you know, these things are on track. These are a little delayed. Maybe we can explore a little bit more. So let's take a look at how our child did here. So mom had concerns about communication, and mom's concerns seems like are validated here. She is coming out. This is considered below cutoff. The gross motor skills are up here. She's above cutoff. Fine motors falling in that gray area. So those are in a monitor area. And then we've got problem solving is falling above cutoff, and also personal social skills. So it's like, what do I do with this information? You know, it's kind of validating the parents' concerns here. So we would say definitely share with the primary healthcare provider. A case like this, you know, probably refer for a hearing screening to see if that is an issue for the child. And then, you know, I would say this would be a child to refer to an early intervention programs to help the family get some support with building that language. So
All right.
so
Well,
that's the ASQ.
Well, first of all, thank you, and I appreciate that. I hope you guys on the participant side found that effective. Again, if we could share that in the in the chat box, that'd be great. I wanted to share this here with you. Have you had any concerns regarding your children reaching any developmental milestones? 38 says yes, 62% says no. Have you found it more challenging to get your kid in? 52% says yes. And then, are you struggling, or have you struggled finding resources online? I don't really need them, or yes. So it's kind of a spread here. I think it's dependent upon the population on the webinar. And do you know about Easterseals Make the First 5 Count program? We probably have some folks who know us who are joining us here. We have 60% says yes, which is fantastic, and 20% that says no. Hey, 3 minutes left. I have a question I think I'd like to ask. I think is pertinent. Again, thank you guys for joining us today. Your information has been fantastic. Remember that this is going to be shared via YouTube. So Toby, Ellyn, Abila, and even Jill, I'd ask that once we, put it out there, that you socialize it with your friends. Says, please share. This is a super important topic. And as a father, you know, I know that I was specifically watching those milestones with my children, right? My last question for you guys, and then I'll turn it over to John. Talk to me about how everything we've talked about is truly impacted during COVID in this virtual environment. What does that look like in this virtual environment? And how has it been impacting the populations that you work with that are served? Toby, I'll start with you.
It's affected a whole...
3 minutes.
Okay, it's affected a whole variety of ways. One is, I think that folks have mentioned that earlier, John mentioned it earlier, that the referrals to early intervention have gone down. However, in DC specifically, they have not gone down as much as we thought they would, which is great. Certainly has forced our providers to really implement coaching, which has been great, because they're doing it through tele-intervention, so they really have no choice now but to go through the family. And I think the third thing that we're going to be hearing a lot more about is that kids experience sort of undue stress, trauma, that when they start going back to early care and education kinds of programs and back into the community, I think our children's behavior is going to show us that being isolated for so long and being bombarded with so many stresses in the family unit may be affecting them, and we should be keeping our eyes out for that.
Abila?
Well, I would say the two things that we are seeing is really just heightened anxiety for parents. So anxiety levels going through the roof, and really having to change the way in which we provide diagnoses, trying to rethink that. Everyone has a different approach to it. We used a tool called the ADOS, and we did our visits over our diagnostic evaluations over 3 visits. Now with COVID, we are heavily dependent on video footage. We've decided to kind of go that route. And actually, it's nice to see children in their natural environments and be able to, see, but there's a lot of technology with challenges that parents getting the video footage, streaming the video footage. So that is really slowing down the diagnostic process on our side. But I would say 2 biggest things is really just helping parents to get to a place where they're a lot less anxious about just in general, just parenting in general, and then and how we get to that diagnosis.
Ellyn?
In many military duty stations and environments, approximately 30% of the population of that installation changes their permanent change of station, a PCS move, during each year. And so right now that's all been kind of confused. People who thought they were going to move didn't move because of COVID. Now they're sort of catching up, maybe last minute they're moving, or their move is going to get delayed. So some of the preparation that people might normally do has not happened because the communities have not figured out what to present. And I think that's one of the problems, is not every community has figured out how to provide the services that they used to in the current environment, whether it's, do I open school, do I not open school, do I open, this not-for-profit daycare center that also does screening, and et cetera. That is a big problem when you don't know what you're going into and your community hasn't figured it out either.
Thank you. Jill, parting words, and then John.
Okay, cool. I would just say really a lot of our children, especially those who are getting early intervention, are really missing their friends and peers. And I always think being in an inclusive environment, like I almost consider the children to be almost the most important part of the early intervention program. So I know families are struggling with that. We've had a mixed bag of reviews from parents. Some kids have been doing really great, and it's been a great time for kids to spend a lot of time with their parents. So we've seen a lot of children be very successful, especially when they're receiving the coaching from the therapist. The parents are able to implement that. But as we've talked about before in previous webinars here, it's extremely stressful for parents who are working and feeling like I'm gonna have to pop my kid in front of a screen, or just not giving them the opportunities to practice these skills like before. So, I for one, I'm really missing seeing all of our children in person as well too.
Well, I want to jump in and I'm going to pass it to John. Thank you everybody for participating. We really had a sticky audience, not tons of questions, but everybody stayed. So I want to thank you all for staying. Ellyn, Toby, Abila, Jill, for your expertise and your subject matter expert space. This has been fantastic. John, thank you for making this happen. I'll be very honest with you. Wasn't sure how we were going to pull this off, but this went off fantastic. So thank you on behalf of the development and the marketing team. We really appreciate you. John, last parting words.
Well, I want to say thanks to our wonderful panelists, and also really echo the theme that they were highlighting, that early intervention is an opportunity. And so if everyone on this call can spread the word to make sure that their friends and their colleagues are aware of screening tools. Very, very often, children who have delays when they receive early intervention get the skills they need, that by the time they reach kindergarten, they no longer have delays. And so this is really a great opportunity to spread the word about the need for screening and to get into services early.
So on that note, I will thank you guys. Look, there's so many more questions that I have and that I'm sure we can talk about. Please all share your quick information, and then we're going to share this out to our population. But if you want to, as we part here, share your email address so how folks can get in contact with you. Last 30 seconds. Let's go. Anybody? No?
I'll go first. I'm Jay. I'll go first. I'm Jay Chimka at ESEAL.org.
LONGT at Georgetown.edu.
I am Abila at worldforautism.org.
Ellyn, you don't want us to write you. No, I'm joking.
She's retired.
She's enjoying retirement, yes.
I think for our military families and the providers who take care of them, everybody's got, some of our families are overseas, so whatever resources here in the US are not going to be quite the same as overseas. Everybody really needs to find out what is in their community, and we have the Exceptional Family Member Program that's present around the world, and so I would suggest people contact their local Exceptional Family Member Program.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate all the participants. Have a fantastic remainder of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.